My name is Amber, and I'm 31 years old. The phone rang at exactly 2 in the morning, and I already knew before I picked it up that it was my mother, because she's the only person in my life who treats sleep as something other people do. Tomorrow, you can join your brother's fiance's family for dinner, but keep your mouth shut, she said, with no greeting, no apology for the hour, nothing. I sat up in the dark and asked her why now, why the warning attached to an invitation that should have just been an invitation. She snapped back almost instantly, like she'd rehearsed it. Her dad's a decorated colonel. Don't embarrass us. I let the words sit there for a second, feeling the familiar shape of being treated like a liability instead of a daughter. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it, and said, "Got it." Then I hung up and lay back down, staring at the ceiling, wondering what exactly I was supposed to be capable of embarrassing anyone with. My brother Holden had been engaged for 3 months to a woman named Vivian, the daughter of a man my family had only ever referred to in hushed, reverent tones, Colonel Bennett Whitfield, decorated, respected, the kind of man whose name alone seemed to straighten people's spines when they said it out loud. I had never met him. I had barely met Vivian, actually, having seen her exactly twice, both times for under 20 minutes, both times while my mother hovered nearby like a stage manager terrified I'd improvise a line that wasn't in the script. I wasn't offended by that part. I was used to it. In my family, I had long ago been cast as the unpredictable one, the embarrassment in waiting, simply because I didn't live the life they'd mapped out for me. No husband, no corner office, no Pinterest-worthy home to show off at holidays. Just me, my apartment, and a quiet job that nobody at family dinners ever bothered asking about, because nobody assumed there was anything interesting to ask. The dinner was held at a private event space downtown, the kind of venue with low gold lighting and a string quartet tucked into a corner like polite furniture. I arrived in a simple navy dress, hair pulled back, nothing flashy, because flashy was its own kind of embarrassment in my mother's rulebook. She met me at the door with a smile so practiced it barely moved her face, looped her arm through mine, and walked me toward the tables like she was delivering a package she didn't fully trust not to break. "Smile, say hello. Don't bring up anything from before," she murmured under her breath, and I nodded, because I'd already decided the easiest way through the night was to disappear into the wallpaper and let Holden have his moment. Holden looked happy, genuinely happy, the kind of happy I hadn't seen on him in years, and for a moment I let myself feel glad for him without complicating it with everything else swirling under the surface of that room. Vivian was warm, warmer than I expected, squeezing my hand and saying she'd heard so much about me, which I doubted, given how carefully my existence seemed to be edited out of every conversation that mattered. I made small talk with relatives I barely recognized, nodded along to stories about Holden's new promotion, and drank exactly 1 glass of wine because my mother's eyes kept finding mine across the room like a leash she was holding from a distance. Then the toasts began. Holden's future father-in-law stood, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform jacket pressed so sharply it looked like it could cut glass, medals lined up across his chest in neat, deliberate rows that told a story most people in that room would never fully understand. The colonel raised his glass, began with the usual warmth. How proud he was of his daughter, how impressed he'd been by Holden's character, how families like ours coming together meant something. And the room leaned in, charmed, the way rooms always lean in for men like him. And then his eyes moved past Holden, past Vivian, past my mother's frozen, expectant smile, and landed directly on me. He stopped mid-sentence. Not a stumble, not a pause for effect. A full stop, the kind that makes a room shift in its chairs without knowing why. He set his glass down slowly, deliberately, and took 2 steps in my direction while 200 eyes followed him like he was the only gravity in the building. My mother's hand tightened around her napkin, so hard I heard the fabric crease. Holden's smile faltered, confused, searching my face for an explanation I didn't have yet either, because I had no idea why a decorated colonel I had supposedly never met in my life was now standing directly in front of me with an expression I could only describe as recognition. "Hello," he said, voice low but carrying, the kind of voice trained to fill rooms without raising itself. "I'm surprised to see you here." He tilted his head slightly, studying me the way you study something you're trying to place from a long time ago, something filed away under a name you weren't sure you'd ever need again. Then slower, quieter, Almost like he already suspected the answer would unravel something in that room. He wasn't prepared to unravel publicly, he asked. Who are you to them? The string quartet had stopped playing. Nobody had told them to. The room fell dead silent. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the ice shifting in someone's glass 3 tables away. My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to remember how words worked. Holden looked between me and the Colonel like he was watching 2 unrelated movies get spliced together by mistake. I set my own glass down carefully, because my hands were steadier than I expected them to be, and I looked Colonel Whitfield directly in the eye. I'm Amber, I said. Holden's sister. It wasn't the answer he was asking for, and we both knew it. He almost smiled, the corner of his mouth twitching like a man enjoying a private joke he wasn't ready to share yet. Captain Amber Reyes, he said, slow and deliberate, using a name I hadn't heard spoken out loud at a family function in over 6 years, a rank my own mother had never once acknowledged existed. Forward operations, 3 years ago. You briefed my unit before the extraction in the Eastern Corridor. You're the reason 11 of my men came home instead of 7. He said it plainly without theater, the way men like him say things that other people spend their whole lives trying to earn the right to say about themselves. My mother's napkin slid off her lap onto the floor, and nobody moved to pick it up. I hadn't planned on this room ever knowing. I'd left active duty 2 years earlier for reasons that were mine and mine alone, taken a quiet civilian role that nobody at my family's dinners ever bothered asking about, and let everyone keep believing the version of me that was easiest to dismiss. It wasn't that I was ashamed of what I'd done. It was that explaining it to people who'd already decided who I was felt like throwing a stone into a lake that had already frozen over. My mother liked her narratives clean. The disappointing daughter, the unpredictable one, the risk she had to manage at events like this one. It was simpler for her than the truth, which was that I had spent years doing work she couldn't fathom, surrounded by men whose lives depended on decisions I made under conditions she would never have to imagine. You told me to keep my mouth shut tonight, I said, turning to her, and my voice came out calmer than I felt, calm in the way you learn to be calm when panic stops being useful to you. So I did. Around us, relatives who'd spent the evening glancing past me like I was part of the wallpaper were now staring with the kind of attention that comes with social recalculation, the rapid mental arithmetic of people realizing they'd misjudged where the power in the room actually sat. Vivian's hand had gone to her chest, and she was looking at her father with something between confusion and dawning understanding. Holden hadn't said a word, but his eyes had gone glassy, like 6 years of half-truths were rearranging themselves behind them all at once. The Colonel turned to address the room, and his voice carried the same authority it had during his toast, except now it had weight behind it that hadn't been there before. I don't embarrass easily, he said, but I'll tell you what does embarrass me. Watching a family undervalue someone who's earned more respect in this room than half the medals on my chest. He looked at my mother when he said it, not unkindly, but without softening it either. The way men who've spent decades giving honest assessments under pressure tend not to know how to do anything else. My mother opened her mouth to respond, found nothing there, and closed it again. For the first time in my entire life, I watched her run out of a script. Holden found me afterward, near the quiet end of the room, away from the murmuring and the recalibrated stares. He didn't apologize in big dramatic terms, he just stood there for a second, then asked quietly why I'd never told him, and I told him the truth, that there hadn't seemed to be room for it, that the version of me everyone had agreed on didn't leave space for the real one to exist. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're absorbing something they should have asked about years earlier, and said he was proud of me, which was the first time I think either of us had said those words between us and meant them. My mother found me near the coat check as I was leaving, her composure rebuilt but thinner now, like a wall patched in a hurry. She started to say something about how I should have told her, how she would have handled the dinner differently if she'd known, and I just shook my head, because that was exactly the problem, that my worth in her eyes had always depended on what I could offer to be seen, never on simply being her daughter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just said goodnight and walked out into the cold air feeling lighter than I had in years, the kind of light that comes from finally letting a room see you as you actually are, instead of who you'd quietly agreed to pretend to be. If this story hit home for you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories like this one, because the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how long someone tries to keep it buried.